Welcome to IFES's Dialogues on Democracy. I'm Editorial and Communications Manager Adam Gallagher, and today I'm here with Vice President of Programs Michael Svetlik to discuss the challenges facing democracy promotion and its role in U.S. foreign policy. In his role at IFES, Michael provides policy and programming guidance to IFES's international operations, which currently include electoral assistance and democratic institution building in over 30 countries. Welcome, Michael. Thanks for joining us today. It's been a very uncertain time for democracy in recent years, with many observers, such as Larry Diamond, pointing to a global democratic recession. With that in mind, can you discuss some of the current challenges to global democracy and democracy promotion that have led to this recession, as well as some new opportunities that have emerged within the context of these challenges?
Sure. I think it's significant that we've recently marked the 35th anniversary of President Ronald Reagan's speech at Westminster, in which he rallied democracies to foster the infrastructure of democracy, democratic institutions, support free press, unions, political parties, things like that, as a way for people to chart their own course, their way of development, and reconcile their differences through peaceful means. That speech was a powerful moment in the democracy movement, now some 30 years ago, and served as a catalyst for the formation of a constellation of organizations, including IFES, that have been dedicated to the advancement of democracy and elections ever since. Now, 3 decades later, we are indeed faced with many challenges, or perhaps some new old challenges. The past few years, in the wake of the global economic recession of 2008, have been really difficult for democratic growth. And as you mentioned, Professor Larry Diamond has even said, that we're experiencing a democratic recession. As, of course, for many, democracy has not been seen as being able to deliver a higher standard of life. And this is especially true in countries that have experienced transition as part of, say, the Arab Spring. And we see this also reflected in public opinion polls in some regions that show that democracy is not as viewed as favorably as it was even 10 or 15 years ago. Authoritarian leadership in many countries have been emboldened, and there's a trade-off that citizens have seemingly been willing to make between political rights and economic or material well-being, and this is given some motivation behind the authoritarian political developments. There's also a sense that democratization is chaotic and painful. This is not new, but something that certainly has been reinforced by the economic conditions of the past several years. There's also the so-called Chinese model, in which economic growth and political liberalization are not seen as needing to go hand in hand with political liberalization, with democratization, as it did in many countries in the 90s, just some 2 decades ago. Closing space is another concern, another problem that has been creeping and intensifying over time. As governments in power seek to limit the activities of the press and civil society, and generally clamp down on free speech in an effort to maintain order, or in reality really maintain control. International organizations are under the spotlight in many countries, but my primary concern is with closing space is the local organizations, the NGOs, the national NGOs, the political parties, and the community-based organizations that are being squeezed out of the public space and public discourse by legal means. Restrictive legal requirements and registration laws and financial audits that are arbitrary and capricious. And this extends really around the world in many places, but it's a real concern.
So, given that kind of difficult context for democracy and the enterprise of democracy promotion, how do you think that organizations like IFES can position themselves to withstand these challenges and then build on new opportunities?
Sure. To be clear, the building strong democratic institutions and systems has always been challenging. And the specific challenges we're facing today, rising authoritarianism, populism, things like closing space, all combine, to inhibit rather than facilitate free expression and work against the open societies, the concept of open society that's really fundamental to political competition and competitive and fair election processes. So for organizations like ours and the organizations which collaborate in this democratic movement or democracy movement, we need to, I think, take this time to rededicate ourselves to and remain true to our ideals. We need to demonstrate our belief and commitment to things such as transparency and accountability and the rule of law. And these are, really fundamental to democratic institutions and democratic processes. So rather than retreat, we really need to renew our sense of purpose and our approach with increased urgency. So as a provider of technical assistance, like many of those we work with, we need to apply comparative best practices and draw upon the experiences, the democratic experiences of both established and emerging democracies. It's interesting that good electoral practice is no longer the domain of so-called mature Western democracies. From things like voter registration, electoral operations and management, in those areas there are good practices from around the world, from countries that are newly democratizing to ones that have been democracies for some time, and these practices need to be shared so that there can be learning across the democratic world in terms of how to approach common problems and common challenges in new ways and in ways that are proving successful. So we also importantly need to be committed to innovation and technology, to adapt and learn from our experiences of adapting technology to the problems and challenges we're facing, because democracy, like any other concept or institution, is constantly evolving, and we must be open to seeking solutions to the issues we're facing through appropriate technology.
So, in recent months, in particular, U.S. foreign assistance has been under a pretty intense microscope. And you've seen in these discussions a consistent distinction drawn between both soft and hard power. Can you talk a little bit about what these concepts refer to and how soft power elements of U.S. foreign policy, like democracy assistance, in the end ultimately bolster hard power?
Yeah. Simply put, hard power and soft power are simply two types of foreign policy tools that states can utilize in their relationships with other countries to affect an outcome. Hard power is, as the name suggests, is something with great force, such as military action or economic sanctions. Meanwhile, soft power, in contrast, is something more subtle and mild. Soft power can and is, as you suggested, is equated with diplomacy and international development efforts that achieve strategic aims. It was Joseph Nye of Harvard that coined the term soft power. And in doing so, to contrast it, he called hard power the ability to use carrot and sticks of economic and military might to make others follow your will. And in terms of soft power, it was interesting that former Defense Secretary Robert Gates considered soft power the civilian instruments of national security, namely diplomacy, strategic communications, foreign assistance, and economic reconstruction and development. And it's within these understandings of hard and soft power that our work at IFES is situated. Fortunately, over the past 2 decades, there's been a broad consensus in the United States among both our political and military leadership that both hard power and soft power are important components of an effective foreign policy. So the international development activities, the electoral systems and democracy building efforts that IFES is involved in are, I think, complementary to the pursuit or use of hard power, or at least, an option to the use of hard power. But importantly, it's not an either-or question, either soft power or hard power. One doesn't choose one simply or the other. As a number of retired generals recently made clear in a letter to Congress, the strengthening of diplomacy and development is alongside defense support are critical to keeping America safe. So both hard and soft power are both important to an effective foreign policy. And I'm proud that IFES is an organization working with so many organizations around the world is working day in and day out to improve the ability of countries to establish democratic institutions that are able to conduct elections that result in governments that reflect the will of the people.
Okay, well, thanks, Michael, for joining us today and being part of this conversation that's certainly going to be ongoing for at least the next couple months as we suss out the budget process and see where U.S. foreign assistance will be going. For more on how IFES promotes democracy around the world, visit www.ifes.org.